to this fifth session, and this session is devoted to spirituality and initiation, and we are having two young, very promising scholars. The first speaker is Dr. Neeti Singh from Benaras Hindu University, and she's going to present a paper entitled Bridging the Gap, Sri Aurobindo's Integral Philosophy and the Return of Spirituality in Modern Discourse. Please welcome Neeti. Come and take the floor.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Namaha sabhabhyah sabhapatibhyascha namo namaha. Good morning, everyone, and I'm thankful to be here. Especially, I'm grateful to Swami Medhanand and Professor Anand Vaidya, who is not here. So I'm Neeti Singh, Assistant Professor in the Department of Philosophy and Religion, Benaras Hindu University, Varanasi. And I'm here to speak on the topic, Bridging the Gap, Sri Aurobindo's Integral Philosophy and the Return of Spirituality in Modern Discourse. So the very theme of this seminar prompts an inquiry into the distance from spirituality during the era of 20th century analytic tradition and logical positivist movement in the West, and the re-emergence of spirituality in 21st century philosophical discourse. So let us start with the very basic question, what spirituality is? So etymologically speaking, the term spirituality originates from the Latin word spiritus, meaning breath or spirit. It evolved from the Old French word spiritualite, referring to the quality or state of being spiritual. Over the time, spirituality broadened to denote the pursuit of the non-material or transcendental aspects of life. On the other hand, adhyatma, originating from Sanskrit, is a compound word consisting of adhi, which signifies contemplating upon or chintana, and atma, referring to the soul or self. Combined adhyatma implies that which pertains to the innermost essence, soul or self, atmanam vidhi. It signifies the spiritual or inner dimension of existence, means to reach selflessness through self-knowledge, atmagyan or atma sakshatkara. However, there are slight cultural, linguistic, and contextual nuances between the widely used term spirituality and the more culture-specific concept of adhyatma, which is deeply rooted in Indian spiritual traditions. Yet, these two terms are taken interchangeably, acknowledging their subtle etymological or cultural variations. So if I'm using spirituality even in Indian context, you have to understand that I'm talking about adhyatma, mentioning and keeping this point in our mind that there is subtle difference between the two terms. As we all know, during the 20th century, A.J. Ayer and Rudolf Carnap emerged as pivotal figures, championing an approach that actively sought to exclude spirituality from the realm of philosophical discourse. Their involvement with logical positivism resulted in this categorical dismissal of metaphysical statements as void of meaning. And this trend found resonance among other prominent figures such as Maurice Lake, Quine, Russell, Wittgenstein, Davidson, and many others. Russell even challenged the relevance of metaphysical inquiries by criticizing metaphysical concepts for lacking empirical grounding, that such statements lack factual significance due to their inability to be empirically verified. Their focus on logic and empirical verification reinforced a separation between philosophical discourse and spiritual contemplation, because during that period, philosophers and scientists prioritized observation, verification, and reason, often scrutinizing mysticism, faith, and religious experiences. Therefore, philosophers like Ayer, Carnap, Wittgenstein, Moore, Russell, and many others closely associated with logical positivism and the analytic tradition, predominantly approached spirituality and religious experiences with skepticism and often outright rejection. Their philosophical perspectives heavily emphasized empiricism, logical analysis, and verification principles, which led them to consider metaphysical or spiritual statements as devoid of cognitive meaning or empirical verifiability. So, in 20th century Western philosophy, for most thinkers, the understanding spirituality was often entwined with their skepticism or dismissal of metaphysical or non-empirical claims. Their approach to defining spirituality was largely rooted in its absence within the realms of empirical evidence or logical analysis, that spirituality lacked a concrete or empirically verifiable definition due to its intangible and often non-empirical nature. As a result, their explanations of spirituality might have appeared nebulous or even deemed irrelevant within their philosophical frameworks, exemplified by Ayer's elimination of metaphysics in his very famous text, Language, Truth, and Logic, as we all know. For these philosophers, the concept of spirituality was often confined to subjective or emotional experiences without attributing any objective or factual significance to such experiences. And it was so because their emphasis on logical positivism constrained their interpretations of spirituality, leading them to define it within the confines of subjective emotional state or experiences that fell outside the realms of empirical evidence or logical analysis. As a result, their definitions tended to exclude the cognition or factual aspects commonly associated with spirituality in other philosophical or religious traditions. Their epistemic limitation defined spirituality solely through subjective experience, disregarding other dimensions. Thus, a discernible gap emerged, distancing thinkers from acknowledging or exploring the concept of spirituality. Consequently, a majority of influential thinkers echoed skepticism toward anything labeled as spirituality. In my understanding, ascribing the lack of interest in spirituality exclusively to scientific rationality represents a limited perspective. While these factors did influence shifting interest, a strictly scientific outlook doesn't inherently negate belief in spiritual realms, as Indian intellectuals have offered a great example of skillfully balancing science and spirituality without apparent clashes. Their seamless integration of scientific temperament and spiritual exploration questions the assumed dichotomy between these areas, proposing a more comprehensive approach to understanding and knowledge. So let's see how Sri Aurobindo tried to bridge that gap, or what was his conception about it. Indian philosophy during that period upheld a robust connection to spiritual exploration while simultaneously engaging with science and logic. Almost all Indian philosophers in 20th century, such as Swami Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, Rabindranath Tagore, Mahatma Gandhi, Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, K.C. Bhattacharya, and many others, championed the harmony between science and spirituality. And I'm grateful to the land of Bengal, because many are from this land only. Many of the philosophers from Bengal, and they have contributed a lot to the contemporary Indian philosophy, reviving the ancient Indian philosophy and knowledge system. So these thinkers promoted a holistic view that incorporated spiritual aspects alongside scientific endeavors, standing in contrast to the analytic philosophy trend. Indian philosophy predominantly focuses on spirituality. However, it has showcased inclination toward materialism as well, through philosophies like Charvaka and Ajivakas. Though spirituality holds immense significance within Indian philosophy and culture, profoundly impacting the world through contributions aimed to bridge the gap created by humanity's immersion in materialism and emphasizing the invaluable essence of spirituality. My focus here revolves around a single philosopher, who is an eminent yogi and mystic, Sri Aurobindo. He introduced integral philosophy and influenced several Eastern and Western thinkers to perceive reality holistically and integrally, encouraging a comprehensive understanding of existence. Sri Aurobindo's teachings revolve around three key ideas, if I put it into this way. The first one is, he emphasized that spirituality does not mean renouncing the world. Rather, it should be part of worldly life. Hence, he affirms life. Second, he saw evolution as the manifestation of the divine potential hidden within all of creation. According to him, humanity represents the latest stage in evolution, yet not its ultimate culmination. Thus, with the innate desire and ability to evolve, he calls in his own language human aspirations, humans can actively engage with nature, catalyzing and expediting the ongoing evolutionary process through yoga and sadhanas. Third, he envisioned a future where love-driven humans would replace ego-driven people, aiming for a more harmonious and divine world. Increasing love within human existence would significantly enhance the world, creating what he termed the divine life. According to Sri Aurobindo, what we notice in the history of human thought is that either spirit has been denied as an illusion of the imagination, or matter has been denied as an illusion of the senses. These are the two opposite and contrasting points. The result is either a bankruptcy of life or an equal bankruptcy in the things of the spirit. The fundamental idea upon which the whole structure of his philosophy is based is that matter as well as spirit is to be looked upon as real. Annam Brahmeti Vyajanata, which is found in the Varuda Bhrigu Samvad in Upanishads. So Sri Aurobindo asserted that, quote unquote, all problems of existence are essentially problems of harmony. This harmony, he says, is at the root of all human problems, be it individual or socio-political as a whole. That is why establishing harmony between opposing elements for a unified and contradiction-free existence was deemed necessary to him. This concept positions him as a trailblazer in harmonizing these realms, which aligns with his philosophy, emphasizing the need for synthesis and unity across seemingly divergent domains. Aurobindo says, the prevalent theories of materialism and spiritualism as rivals and insufficiently attempts to explain the world. He aims to synthesize or merge these opposing views. Also, he articulates that recognizing the eternal spirit within mortal existence and acknowledging matter as a worthy material allows for the formation of a divine life on earth. To truly grasp the significance of integralism, one must delve into Sri Aurobindo's views regarding the conflicting notions of materialistic denial and ascetic refusal. The integral philosophy of Sri Aurobindo is an integration of ancient Indian philosophies such as Advaitism, Yoga, Tantra, and many more. His teachings are derived from ancient Indian wisdom found in Vedas, Upanishads, Puranas, and Bhagavad Gita, so to say, asserting a unified reality underlying the universe. In his schema of world order, while all beings are inherently connected to this eternal self, that is Satchidananda, they are obscured by separative consciousness. Through disciplined practices, means sadhana, one can unveil this inner divinity and embrace their true self. Central to his philosophy is consciousness. He terms it Chitta Shakti, engaged in matter that permeates all existence from inanimate matter to sentient beings, suggesting a universal consciousness underlying reality, one indivisible, that is pure existence. This consciousness evolves and manifests itself in increasingly complex forms, leading to the emergence of higher levels of awareness, panpsychism. His cosmopsychist view expands on panpsychism by suggesting a cosmic consciousness or a universal mind encompassing the entire cosmos. This cosmic consciousness is not merely an aggregation of individual consciousness, but a unified, all-encompassing consciousness that guides the evolutionary process and the development of the universe. Sri Aurobindo claims that evolution acts as the vehicle for this consciousness to free itself, progressively emerging through life, that is vitality, and mind, manas, toward greater perfection, supermind. It does not halt at the mental stage, but rather proceeds towards a spiritual and supramental consciousness as the next phase. This transition toward a dominant supermind would enable the complete expression of divinity, facilitating life's ultimate perfection. In human evolution, nature evolves with a conscious will, yet the mind's capacity is limited, so a transformation is needed beyond its boundaries, and Sri Aurobindo proposes a method of integral yoga, which is an integration of all the ancient practices of yoga, such as Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Raj Yoga, as these practices are a kind of catalyst in the evolutionary process. The yoga of Sri Aurobindo has for its object nothing else than the preparation of the field so that when the supramental light descends, it may find the soil fit to receive it. It is yoga that enables us to receive the new light that is coming from the above, by opening all the doors of our mind, life, soul, and mind. Unlike past attempts to withdraw from the world, he envisions a descent of the higher principle into the world, replacing the mind's limitations with the supramental truth consciousness, Rita-Chitta, and this transformation, facilitated by yoga, aims to enable humans to dynamically grow into a divine race by unlocking the concealed supramental principles within. However, this transformation is not immediate or sudden. It's a gradual process requiring numerous steps. The average person resides in their surface mind, surface life, and surface body. Yet within lies an inner being, Chaitya Purush, at each level, holding greater potential. The initial phase of yoga involves unveiling this inner being and governing life outwardly from its wisdom. This exploration leads to the discovery of the true self, distinct from the outer mental, vital, and physical elements, a spark of the divine reality. Living from the soul, one purifies and aligns the rest of their nature with its drive towards truth. Subsequent stages involve an ascension towards higher principles of being, yet even then, it's not an instant immersion into the full supramental light and force. Ascension and descension, that is Arohara, Avarohara, go on from both ways, and then the real evolution takes place where gradually the consciousness starts widening, heightening, and integrating itself. There exist intermediary levels of consciousness that need exploration and integration into the mind, life, and body before the complete truth consciousness can operate and divinity can be manifested in this very life. Here one may ask, how do we grasp this divine reality? Sri Aurobindo, in his magnum opus, The Life Divine, delineates two spheres, the lower and the upper hemisphere, separated by a curtain of overmind. Understanding the lower hemisphere relies on the intellect and mind. However, comprehending the upper hemisphere entails transcending the mind's barrier. Assessing knowledge of this higher realm is akin to the Upanishadic concept of Ritambhara Pragya, achievable only by ascending to the supermind level and connecting with the supreme being, that is Satchidananda. This journey of self-discipline or sadhana is arduous, yet every step forward enhances the possibility of eventual release and perfection. It necessitates expanding the mind's horizons to comprehend the self and the infinite, entering the realm of cosmic consciousness and mastering vitality, passions, and mental expositions. While external austerity isn't mandatory, conquering attachment, controlling bodily needs and instincts, and transcending self-interest are crucial. It's an amalgamation of old principles, discerning reality from appearance through knowledge, devotion, surrender through the heart, and directing action towards serving a greater reality than the ego. This comprehensive training readies the entire being to respond and undergo a transformation when it becomes possible for the greater light and force to operate within. This is what spiritualism means in Aurobindo's view. According to him, materialists have an easier stance. capable of denying the spiritual and formulating a convincing monistic doctrine that emphasizes the oneness of matter or force. However, he perceives such materialistic monism as inherently short-lived. The materialist asserts and rely primarily on sensory evidence, which was the case in the logical positivism movement in the West. But Aurobindo highlights the inherent limitations of the senses in comprehending the vastness of existence. He notes that the scope of what the senses can perceive is trivial compared to what lies beyond their reach. Despite claims of scientific support, Sri Aurobindo believes that even scientific endorsement fails to justify the denial inherent in materialism. The intellect, driven to solve all problems through matter, often reaches unsatisfactory conclusions. It tends to gravitate towards theoretical constructs and atomistic principles that remain largely unknowable in practice. Sri Aurobindo highlights that the materialistic focus on science neglects a fundamental aspect, the scientific spirit. This spirit acknowledges the intellect's limitation, persistently striving forward without reaching a final destination. Aurobindo observes that science, by its very nature, constantly hints at realms beyond our current understanding. Consequently, he views the materialistic denial of the non-material as ultimately unstable and contradictory. Sri Aurobindo highlights that pure or hardcore spiritualism or a spiritualistic view can also be one-sided and partial. He notes that ascetics' strong denial of the material world, saying that it is all mithya, akin to the materialist rejection of the spiritual realm. Each partly presents equally compelling justification for their perspectives. And Aurobindo here elucidates that just as the materialism or materialist emphasizes matter as reality and views the beyond as either non-existent or unknowable, the ascetic, on the other hand, captivated by the beyond, asserts pure spirit as the sole reality, free from change and the relative. That was the problem we have already seen in Parmenides and other idealists. The ascetics claim direct knowledge of supra-sensible realities, viewing higher consciousness as capable of offering more certain knowledge than the senses. This understanding leads ascetics to negate the reality of the material world, culminating in concepts like cosmic illusion as observed in Indian asceticism. Sri Aurobindo addressed these issues as the two negations and tried giving a synthesis of these opposing worldviews, considering the world as real as Brahman. For that matter, he introduced integral yoga, which identifies 5 levels of being: physical, vital, mental, psychic, and supermind, akin to the Panchakoshas of the 5 sheets of Vedanta: Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, and Anandamaya. And 3 types of being: outer, inner, and psychic. It could be, seen as the sthula, sukshma, and karana. The psychic being akin to higher mind stages aligns with Buddhi in Sankhya. Emphasizing spiritual growth, Aurobindo advocates unifying all aspects with the divine. His teachings promote the way out of man's ignorance through an evolution of consciousness and a comprehensive transformation of the entire being, not just individual faculties. Hence, the spiritual destiny of life or the divine life can be realized on this earth, in this body itself. Now, let's see and let's talk about the return of spirituality in modern times. So, however, as we enter in the 21st century, a notable change emerges. We have already heard Swamiji very well spoken on the same thing. Philosophers guided by non-Western and global views on the philosophy of religion are reviving spiritual thought in philosophical discussions. They advocate for the significance of spiritual experiences, relying on perception and testimony principles. This shift contrasts with the past strict exclusion of spirituality in analytic philosophy, showing a renewed interest and support for spiritual exploration in today's philosophical conversations. The dichotomy between science and spirituality, or reason and faith, fades as we delve deeper into the unexplored realm of science, such as quantum mechanics, neuroscience, etc., and engage in a systematic exploration of spiritualism, such as yogic practices. These previously distinct realms intersect, showcasing a complex relationship that surpasses mere opposition. hinting at their potential harmony and mutual understanding. Moreover, higher understanding integrates and encompasses rather than discards the lower level of understanding. In other words of Richard P. Feynman, a great scientist, scientific knowledge is, quote unquote, scientific knowledge is a body of statements of varying degrees of uncertainty, some most unsure, some nearly sure, but none is absolutely certain. Renowned philosophers like William Ewing Thomson and Martha Nussbaum explore spirituality through their works. Ken Wilber integrates Eastern philosophy influenced by Śrīvidyā's integral philosophy and Buddhism as well. Amit Goswami merges quantum physics with Vedantic philosophy, and figures like Deepak Chopra and Robert Kagan highlights the resurgence of spirituality. The list is very, very long. We just need to see the fact that the most ancient Indian method of spirituality are still relevant in today's far-paced world. Within scientific discourse, Indian spiritualism resonates notably in the domain of quantum physics. Concepts such as non-locality, interconnectedness, and the role of consciousness in shaping reality show similarities with principles found in philosophies like Vedanta and Buddhism. Moreover, in neuroscience, the exploration of meditation and its impact on brain function and mental health draws inspiration from ancient Indian spiritual practices such as mindfulness, meditation, breathing techniques, and other yogic practices. Thus, the return of spirituality in modern discourse signifies a notable shift from purely materialistic or reductionist viewpoints towards a more holistic understanding of human existence. And this resurgence acknowledges the intrinsic value of exploring spiritual dimensions in addressing fundamental questions about meaning, purpose, and interconnectedness. Now, I'm heading towards the conclusive part. Aurobindo envisions spiritual transformation as the descent of elevated attributes such as light, knowledge, power, force, bliss, and purity into the entire being, penetrating even the depths of our subconscious darkness. Our error lies in attempting to grasp the transcendent and infinite using our finite minds. That's the problem. We overlook that the infinite can only be comprehended through a logic that resonates with the infinite itself. Otherwise, we fall into the trap of a categorical mistake. The influence of Indian spiritualism and yogis like Sri Aurobindo and Vivekananda on 21st century Western thought is profound. They claimed that materially advanced societies grapple with mental well-being and a sense of lacking. It highlights the bankruptcy of the soul as when we are materially saturated and spiritually starved, we tend to return to our true self, our inner self. This impact resonates across diverse philosophical orientations and scientific conversations, acknowledges the numerous influential scientists who endorse the spiritual essence found in both ancient and modern Indian philosophies. In an era marked by technological advancements and scientific inquiry, there is a growing recognition that spirituality offers essential insights into the human experience that science alone cannot fully encompass. This revival involves a renewed interest in ancient wisdom, contemplative practices, and philosophical inquiries, aiming to integrate spiritual perspectives into various fields, including philosophy, psychology, ethics, business, and even scientific exploration, which leads us to the conclusion that this return to spirituality reflects an acknowledgement of the limitations of purely materialistic paradigm in addressing profound existential queries. It underscores the need to incorporate spiritual insights, promoting a more balanced and comprehensive approach to understanding human consciousness, well-being, and our relationship with the world. In the West, quantum physicists like Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger, and Wolfgang Pauli have historically hinted at connections between quantum mechanics and spiritual concepts. In contemporary times, physicists like Amit Goswami, Fred Alan Wolf, and numerous astrophysicists, neuroscientists, medical experts, counselors, motivational speakers, they are all exploring the intersections between their respective disciplines and spirituality. So 20th century philosophers viewed science and spirituality as opposing forces, yet Adhyatma never endorsed such a divide. Figures like Aurobindo reconciled both, acknowledging their significance. Presently, as scientific advancement progresses, a parallel emerges, and scientific discoveries are indicating spirituality, suggesting a supreme conscious entity as the ultimate cause of creation. Though it is still a much debated area in the contemporary discourse, yet no one can deny that spirituality is re-emerging significantly. And I conclude my talk with these words expressed by a great British historian, Dr. Arnold Toynbee, at the valedictory function of Edinburgh University, quote unquote, "It is already becoming clear that a chapter which had a Western beginning will have to have an Indian ending, if it is not to end in the self-destruction of the human race. At this supremely dangerous moment in history, the only way of salvation for mankind is the Indian way." So these were my understanding of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy and spirituality in today's world. You are humbly allowed to have your opposing views. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have just 10 minutes for discussion, so I would like to encourage first the participants. Maybe Itai, please.
Thank you for a rather interesting talk. I find certain themes that obviously connect with my own, what I was talking about yesterday. There's a question. I don't know if you have anything to say about it. No, don't feel obliged, but I'm just interested. So some of the things you mentioned, like for example, that for Aurobindo there's definitely evolution, but there's also involution, right? So we got this structure. That's in itself very interesting because, there's all sorts of problems that come from reductionism. We try to kind of like explain, the higher in terms of the lower, right? And seem to work more and more problematically the higher you get. So even the topic of our meeting, spirituality, right? If you try to explain it just by kind of like, selection principles, right? And you get to something like whatever social, that it's some sort of something that emerged from social evolution or something like this. There's always a problem, right? But my point is, so we got to start thinking, if you really take seriously things like that consciousness may be fundamental, or that we may have this kind of going both from below and from above and so on. In some sense, that's very exciting, but there's also a challenge. And I think, I'm getting close to my question, because there's something that, there might be a difference between, the Western background and the Indian background. And I wonder if you think that Aurobindo can contribute in that sense. What I mean is this. So for the Western background, if you look at, there was a whole very interesting enterprise, right, of things like Augustine and the thought in the Middle Ages and so on. I mean, and of course before Aristotle and Plato. And so you got the whole machinery of certain forms of knowledge, right, that were not necessarily just the empirical, right, the empirical scientific or the kind of thing that empiricism was later emphasizing. There was this idea, some kind of confidence in that you can, there's the light of reason or fitting the, grasping the form, or, all sorts of epistemological also principles behind it. And there was a big attrition in the confidence that this could be a valid form of knowledge, right? Now, if you think now we can try of opening up to try to, change, rethink about things, there's a problem of what of any of that could be, how can do we really have only the scientific kind of like empirical sort of knowledge and then, just pure mysticism, or are there certain epistemic principles that are, So I wonder, just if you think that, especially because in the Indian tradition, and so we don't find this breakage, right? It's a different history. And more specifically in Aurobindo, do you think that there's any form of kind of like knowledge, some of epistemic principles or something like this that might be helpful in this sort of challenge?
Yep. Thank you so much, sir. I think this is more an explanation or suggestion than the question, but still, I would try to say a few words on that. When Sri Aurobindo explains the idea of evolution, and when he, further extends or separates out the entire cosmos into two spheres, the lower and the higher, he says that the higher hemisphere and the elements like Sat, Chit, Anand, and Supermind, that is Ati-Manas, they are, somehow coming into the lower realms, like the matter and the life and the psyche and the mind. They are actually the subordinate forms of the higher hemisphere. So when the Sat, for example, the pure existence, the pure existence, when it comes to the material world or the lower hemisphere, it directly comes into the matter. And then Chit comes into the life. And the Ananda comes into the psyche, and Supermind is into the mind. So it is like this kind of a structure, okay? And also when the epistemic things Aurobindo talks about, firstly he says that the knowledge and ignorance, both are, the Vidya, Avidya, both are in the Brahman. Avidya is not something separated out by the knowledge. So the 7 ignorances and the 7 kinds of knowledge he talks about. So all these things, when he's talking, he's just trying to say that if only one is the reality, whatever is in the world, whether it is material or vital or psychic or mental or supramental, everything is that reality only. But there are, some degrees of consciousness, the separations at the stages, and that is why we are starting from one stage and going upward, getting evolved. So we are all in this evolutionary process. We are all in our own pace, and it doesn't matter whether we do anything or not, we are getting evolved. Since the life itself is progressing towards the divinity, so for example, I want to explain it into this way, that for example, this is an advanced era. We are in a technological society. One person who is working at the, at such a place where he's completely ignorant and not having any kind of education, but the person is still know how to operate the mobile phones and doing everything. Because he is in this phase, and since everybody is advancing, simultaneously the impact can be seen on that ignorant, completely illiterate person. So it is that kind of thing, but still, if we want to achieve the divine life, that, consciousness as soon as possible, we have to put some efforts. That is sadhana, yogic practices. So all these things are, I think, very hard to put into one presentation. And I read one paper Swami Medhananda wrote on your panpsychism view, and that was quite interesting. Sir, you showed all these things in that paper. So it is also, I think, very considerable. But I don't know whether I made any point or not. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's time for another question. Maybe Mick was the first one. Yeah, so you will be the last. Mick, please.
Thanks. When I read Aurobindo's work, I'm always very struck by the sort of eloquence of expression, very compelling rhetorical style, and I see him as something of a sort of visionary philosopher who's setting out a grand vision of reality and cosmic evolution and so on. But I rarely find anything that I would describe as an argument, and I just wondered whether you would concur with this characterization, or whether you do find arguments in his work, and perhaps with particular reference to the notion of cosmopsychism that you alluded to. Do you find anything that might be described as an argument for a cosmopsychist conception of reality in Aurobindo's work?
Yeah, actually, I have encountered many arguments like that, like cosmological arguments are there, teleological arguments are there, ethical arguments are there, many more arguments are there, and I haven't read much. I have read just Life Divine text, almost all the chapters. I won't say that complete text, but at least out of the 56 chapters, I have read quite 45 or 50 chapters of Life Divine and Human Cycles, some of the portions, and Savitri, of course. So, and some letters on the yoga and all. So I found many arguments that he's giving, but still he's every time indicating towards the logic of infinite. He says that since we want to understand the infinite, we cannot take this finite logic the bi-valued logic or this dual logic in order to understand that. So we need an infinite logic. Now people can raise their eyebrows, what is this logic of infinite? So he even, doesn't very much explicate what this logic of infinite. He just says that the kind of expressions, linguistic expressions are used in Vedas, Upanishad, and Bhagavad Gita, and the poetic, the aesthetic, like Satyam Shivam Sundaram, which gives us the instant kind of, the revelation of that divine, that is kind of the infinite of logic. So we can understand that logic in that way. So that is a very unique kind of argument Sri Aurobindo used, and also some of the cosmological, teleological, ethical, and other logics are also there, arguments are there. So he has used kind of like many more arguments, also indicated towards many fallacies other philosophical schools are committing. So it is very logical as well, I would say. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And we have time just for a very short question. If you kindly formulate it precisely, would be welcome.
Thank you very much. I want to know, Sri Aurobindo's realistic Advaita, I have understood. Realistic Advaita means everything is real. So that modifies the traditional explanation of Advaita Vedanta, which is illusionistic. So according to Sri Aurobindo, moksha is the first step of his sadhana, not the last step. First step from where he reaches the supramental and brings it down to transform this earthly life into life divine. And this evolution and transformation, these are the three stages that
triple transformation.
One has come to this one supreme has come through involution to this world, and then this world, total world, will evolve to that supreme, and that supreme divine mother will come again to transform this earth into life divine. That is what I have read in Śrīvidyā. Arise, O soul, vanquish time and death. So I want to know, how do you modify this illusionistic Advaita and realistic Advaita? Can you just explain?
Yeah, that's a wonderful point, ma'am. Actually, in Sri Aurobindo's ideas, he says that all this creation is an ecstatic dance of Shiva. So it's just for its own, enjoyment. But because it is, coming onto this lower hemisphere, again uplifting it towards higher hemisphere, again doing this, and this is going on and on. So what if once we will reach to the divinity, we all will be, in a divine world, then what will happen? Whether the world process or this involution will be, coming to an end? That is a question. But see, Sri Aurobindo says that we are since all the divine, and if we know, we believe through the faith and through the testimony that only Brahman is real. His one point is very much clear and very, I think, near to the Ramanuja's views than the Shankara's. He is non-dualist, but still he is very closer to the Ramanuja view, and he says that if Brahman is real, how could this world, which is the very manifestation of the same reality, can be unreal? It cannot be true. So it is not mithya, it is not unreal, it is as real as the Brahman. And still if one is asking that if we are also Brahman, I am in universe in myself, then what is the point in all this divinity and evolution, and why is again coming on into this world and all? So this is just a dance of Shiva, it is happening, and it will be happening. So this is just an answer. And this is just an answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Now it's time for the last paper in this session, which will be presented by Tarinee Awasthi. And as you can see, the title is displayed already. Tarinee is a historian of Sanskrit intellectual culture, especially interested in late Vedanta and Mimamsa. Are you going to yes, present from here, please?
For the record, I'm very impressed with all the people who have read Savitri in this room. I have never had the courage. But thanks so much for having me here, Maharajji and Professor Vaidya. This is really a terrible room to talk about the epistemic status of initiation in, because there are philosophers and there are practitioners, and I am a mere historian. So I apologize. What I'm going to say today is kind of at the intersection of two kinds of projects, only one of which I've really worked out, or really begun to seriously work out, which is about certain trends in Sanskrit intellectual culture during the late second millennium. My submission to sort of anticipate some of what I'm going to end up with is that rather than a narrative of radical epistemic rupture, it makes better sense to think about the period roughly from the 15th, 16th into the 20th centuries in terms of continuities and shifts, obviously conditioned by larger global and socio-political changes, but not fundamentally transformed by them in a way that's unprecedented. The answer to the question about the epistemic status of initiation in South Asian or Sanskrit philosophy is, well, there isn't any for the most part until maybe the 19th or 20th century. So this is what I'm going to try and demonstrate. Interpersonal transmission is not normally even considered, let alone taken seriously as a means of valid cognition in what I'm calling, for want of a better phrase, mainstream Sanskrit philosophy, by which I mean Nyaya, Mimamsa, at a certain point, Vedanta, Buddhist epistemology, and traditions that are in close engagement with them and with which these traditions are in close engagement. And we can talk about this category. I don't think it's a good category, but we can talk about it if anyone wants to. Systems like Mimamsa or Buddhist Pramana or Nyaya did consider, if only to dismiss in case of Mimamsa, the possibility of yogic perception. I want to start by talking about yogic perception for a while, just to get a sense of the kinds of concerns that informed discussions around extrasensory means of perception for these people, and then I'm going to try and show why initiation was not really part of that conversation and the process by which it did come to be part of that conversation. And I'm going to try and do all of this in the next 25 minutes. I'm all kinds of impressive. But I know I'll come to Dīkṣā a little bit later. Please bear with me. On the other side of things, we do have instances of certain kinds of transmission, particularly in epic, which are distinct from Vedic Dīkṣā, which I won't go into at all. I think Jan Honda has already said, I think, what needs to be said about it for the most part. But they do lead to knowledge, either directly or through the accordance of a certain faculty. For example, we have Sanjay, who's given a certain, say, some kind of a transmission by Vyasa, and he's able to see. But the process of transmission itself is not an epistemic, does not have epistemic value. He is accorded a faculty that then comes to have epistemic value. So I think that's somewhat different. Chris Wallace is, in his dissertation To Enter, To Be Entered, has done an excellent study of Shaktipat in Shaiva traditions, and I also want to say that I'm limiting myself to 3 instances in Śrīvidyā between the 16th and between the 18th and 20th century. There are obviously lots of discussions of Dīkṣā before, and this is I limit myself to that partly in service of a historical argument. And so in the end, I'll talk about a few instances where initiation is discussed in the late second millennium. Back, I think, to yogic perception now. One useful place, obviously, to start discussing extrasensory perception is through the Yoga Sutra. The Yoga Sutra and Bhashya talk about Ritambhara Prajna, or truth-bearing wisdom, which we have talked about on several occasions over the last couple of days, including in your talk. And the Bhashya talks about 3 ways of producing the kind of insight that leads to the obtainment of yoga, right? Which is verbal testimony, inference, and what he calls the dhyana bhyasa rasa, the taste of repeated meditation, if you will. Elsewhere, the Yoga Sutra does talk about the intervention of Ishvara in the instructional process, but that's not directly connected with this kind of special Ritambhara Prajna cognition. What I want to draw attention to in the discussion in the Yoga Sutra is that it's not uncomfortable. The Yoga Sutra is not uncomfortable, at least at the stage of Sutra and Bhashya, with the idea of personal testimony or the results of meditation having epistemic value, right? And this will change in a few centuries, thanks partly to Vachaspati. So these three categories, Vachaspati kinds of maps them onto Upanishadic, Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, right? And whereas the Yoga Sutra and Bhashya talk, this is a bit of a tangent, but the Yoga Sutra and but it's relevant to what we'll come to towards the end. The Yoga Sutra and Bhashya talk about personal testimony very comfortably. Every time Vachaspati is encountered by that in his commentary, he twists himself 7 ways to make it sound like this is really about Buddhist scripture versus our kind of smriti, and it's really about how we should not trust Buddhist scripture. Anyway, so, and then this is tied up to a longer process. But this is relevant because it reflects what was happening in the world of Sanskrit Shastra in the intervening centuries between the Yoga Sutra Bhashya and the 16th century, right? Because these are the kinds of concerns that are becoming important. How do we feel about human testimony? Are we comfortable with it? And what the growing status of scripture and scriptural authority, again, it's sort of shaped by processes that happened in the kind of conversation that took place after the so-called epistemological turn between followers of Dignaga and, well, Shrabara and the Nayayikas. And it is in that, so I don't want to go into too much detail about what Buddhist epistemologists and Mimamsakas say about yogic perception, because that's been worked out extensively by people like McCrea, like Alstringer. So I'm just going to draw upon certain things which I think are relevant to the conversation I'm trying to have here. Shabara's discussion of the authority of Shruti says that human statements are simply not relevant with regard to things like dharma, because humans have no way of accessing it, and it's like it's a little bit trying to sniff red, right? You can't do it. It's not the right faculty. It's Kumarila who, in his discussion, introduces the problem with human beings, which is that men are mostly liars. Men have always been mostly liars, right? And so, of course, we can't trust a person. And if a person is saying that they have some kind of an extrasensory access, of course we can't believe them, right? Of course, Kumaril does not talk about Dīkṣā. I think he would be appalled at the idea of Dīkṣā. I like to imagine what it would be like if somebody ever tried to initiate Kumaril into something in the kind of transmission that we are thinking of here. In the context of Buddhist epistemology, the discussion doesn't betray quite the same kind of suspicion that we see in Kumarila, but it's not accepting of any and all extrasensory perceptions either. Yogic perceptions are thought to be produced by intense concentration or bhavana of an object, and the intensity of that focus and over time results in an appearance that is clear and distinct. It's sputabha, and it is kalpanapura, it is without conceptualization, and therefore it can count as perception of a certain kind. They do recognize, however, and I think Jnanashri actually opens his Yoga Nirnaya with, well, it's like, somebody in love can also see a woman like that. Right? It's the same thing. You focus very hard. So, but why does that not count as perception? Because it's not abhranta, it's not non-erroneous, right? Because perception must be, for dharmakirti, both kalpanapura without conceptualization and also abhranta, non-erroneous, right? And Dharmottara clarifies this in the Nyayabindu Tika, that the only kind of perception produced by bhavana, in the sense yogic perception is, that counts as valid, is the perception of the Four Noble Truths, right? And I think other similar things that are justified in that context. Dharmakirti, interestingly, and this is a bit of an aside, he does address the problem of initiation or Dīkṣā close to the end of the Pramana Siddhi chapter, but he does not discuss it as an epistemic instrument, but as a means for liberation, as something transformative. And of course, he rather snarkily, I think, in part, dismisses it. I want to touch briefly upon Shankara on yogic perception as an epistemic means. He recognizes the possibility that you can have such a cognition, but he refuses to grant it authority over, say, what you get from the Veda. And that, I think, ties up to what you were saying, and I think drawing from your paper, Maharaj, about Swami Vivekananda and his discussion of the kind of people that count as authority. And he says they should not counter what is in general known. And that, to me, resonates with what Shankara says about yogic perception cannot counter what you know from the Veda. Of course, Shankara has an argument about it, which is that for Shankara, you can only get such a cognition through practices that you get from the Veda, and therefore such a cognition that's produced from those practices cannot directly contradict what you know from Shruti. The reason why I bring all this up, like I said, is to get a sense of the kinds of preoccupations that surrounded the problem of religious experience and extrasensory perception in this particular kind of philosophy that we are talking about. The problem has more to do with the question of scriptural authority and the possibility of independent verifications of the results of yogic perception. The only tradition that amongst the ones that we examined that is not preoccupied with these problems is the Yoga Sutra and Bhashya, and that too in some ways just up to just before Vachaspati, right? Things change after. So like I said, so far as the Yoga Sutra and Bhashya themselves are concerned, the object of yogic perception is precisely that which cannot be cognized through other means, including agama, which, you know, if you want to think of it in terms of Shruti, should include Shruti, right? Because to the authors of the Yoga Sutra and Bhashya, you can only grasp universals through verbal testimony and inference, and you can only grasp particulars through perception, but regular perception cannot grasp things that are not that are blocked or very small and so on and so forth, and yogic perception can. Like I said, I'm not going to go into Vedic initiation. And Wallace has shown, of course, that initiation in tantric context is normally understood in terms of transformation, or as he says, to enter, to be entered, right? It's a process of, we'll see a little bit of it with Bhaskara Rai. The guru transmits something of themselves into the disciple, or the deity takes over. And Fred Smith, for example, has talked about similar processes in terms of possession. Wallace likes the idea of a porous self. I'm going to leave that here and turn to Śrīvidyā in the late second millennium, finally. Śrīvidyā, as Anna Golovkova has suggested, and I argue in my work, is a process, sort of in the development of Śrīvidyā, different scholar practitioners in the second millennium framed Śrīvidyā in terms of the philosophical systems that they found closest and most and easiest to access. And so for example, of these figures, Bhaskara Rai was a lot of times a Mimamsaka. That was a system that he felt most comfortable with. That was a system that he was in closest engagement with. For Tarkaratna, it was Nyaya and his own particular kind of Vedanta. And for Swami Vedabharati, it was Advaita Vedanta and Yoga. Right? So these systems, and if you look at the period before the 18th century, we will see that different scholars of Śrīvidyā articulated in terms of different systems. So you will have some who have a greater affinity, for example, to Kashmir Shaivism. Bhaskara Rai kind of does, but not quite, and I don't want to get into that lest I run out of time. So Bhaskara Rai was active in the 18th century. I've already suggested that he was really working on the cutting edge of Mimamsa. And one of his preoccupations was the organization of canon. I'm not going to go into any of this, I think. But essentially, one of the things he wanted to do, and Venkatrishnan has referred to this, is that he wants Purvamimamsa, Uttaramimamsa, and Bhakti Mimamsa to be part of a progression. Each of them has their own corresponding Shruti and their own corresponding Smriti, right? And the system is not always very neat, but this is broadly the system. So his point is, you do, just like Vedantans will tell you, you do Purvamimamsa, I mean some Vedantans will tell you, you study Shruti, you do Purvamimamsa, you understand ritual, you perform ritual, and then once you understood the limits of ritual, this is sort of kind of like what Ramanuja would say, then you start to inquire into Brahman, right? And he says, Bhaskara Rai, and once you've inquired into Brahman and you've gotten to the point of just before or just at direct experience, then you're eligible for pursuing these special Upanishads like the Tripura Upanishad, the special kind of Mimamsa called Bhakti Mimamsa, and of course, the corresponding Smriti is the kind of Tantras that Bhaskar Rai talks about. The other thing that has happened in the last millennium, basically I would say starting from Yamuna into this period, is the sneaking in of human-authored texts, right? The scope was created already in the commentarial tradition and the Mimamsa Sutra, but it's expanded more and more to the point that, again, I keep talking about how Kumarila would be appalled, but Kumarila would be appalled at what Bhaskar Rai thinks he can say as a Mimamsaka, right? Because what is all this? Tantras being taken seriously as scripture, what is happening, right? So Bhaskar Rai talks about Dīkṣā, but he never talks about Dīkṣā when he's talking about valid sources of authority, right? When he's talking about epistemic means, it's usually Shruti and Tantra insofar as he thinks it's Shruti based. I mean, that's a complicated argument. But he does talk about Dīkṣā, and he talks about Dīkṣā exactly in the way that you would think, that in the way that earlier Tantric traditions talk about Dīkṣā, which is that the Guru. So this is an instance where Hayagriva and Agastya are talking about the transmission of certain secrets, and Agastya is asking, why did you not teach me about Lalita Sahasranama? Did you forget it, or am I not eligible? And then he says, well, it couldn't be because I'm not eligible, because you can make me eligible, right? He's not saying that you can magically cause me to cognize it. He's saying you can make me eligible to hear about it and understand it, right? The other is, this is again a classical, almost classical description of Dīkṣā, which is that the Guru, through his own sight, enters the sight of the disciple, and that also involves the transmission of consciousness, right? Tarkaratna, our next person, I'm okay for time, right? 10 minutes, okay. Tarkaratna, he was a Vedantin, he had this preoccupation with, and this is again a preoccupation that you see throughout the late second millennium in Bhaskara Rai and earlier Śrīvidyā writers, to make this system be taken seriously as a philosophy, right? Gopinath Kaviraj has it, so does Tarkaratna. Tarkaratna's way of dealing with this is to write a Shakta Vedanta, right? So he writes a Prasthanatraya commentary on this from the Shakta perspective, and he has two angles to it. One is to prove that Śrīvidyā is properly Vedic and so on and so forth, and the other is he has his own little thing about what Brahman consists of, what this Shakti Brahman is, and it's to put it briefly, it's a combination of a conscient and inconscient aspect, but it's an eternal combination, and they never part. They're always there together. So for Tarkaratna, he has, I don't want to talk about his other stuff, there's no time, but he says that, how does grace work, right? He says that intellect is part of the transformation of the inconscient aspect of Shakti Brahman. And just like if you were to wet the threads of a cloth, the cloth itself gets wet. So just like that, when one practices certain kinds of religious spiritual disciplines, with one's mind, the substratum, which is Shakti Brahman, also gets affected by that and gets drenched, and in response extends grace. Right? But he talks about grace as he accessed it in this way, right? He says, I was very concerned about this thing. And again, your goddess appearing in a dream is normal by this point. Again, over the second millennium, we have instances that Whitney Cox talks about, some of them. So the goddess, I was very concerned about how we can make worship of the Shakta, from the Shakta perspective into a philosophical system, and there's no such text as a Shakta philosophy, and the goddess appeared to me, and in an instant, she transmitted into me this stuff, which I'm working out in all of these works, right? So this is kind of, I would say, closer than Bhaskara Rai is to an initiatory experience having a sort of epistemic status. We get now into our 20th century figure, Swami Veda. And again, I'm taking him as an example. I think we can see similar processes in Swamiji, for instance, in some ways, in the sense that over the course of, so let's say around from the 13th, 14th century, and Jason Schwartz has a great paper on the closer integration of Advaita and Yoga through the latter half of the second millennium, or maybe a little bit longer. And we see in people, in texts like the Vedanta Sara, use of Sankhya categories at some length. And again, that's also something that Swami Veda is influenced by. So, and he does have a bit of a preoccupation with the Yoga Sutra. So just like for Bhaskara Rai, he wanted to do it through Mimamsa and a little bit of sort of Shaiva practice traditions, and Tarkaratna wanted to do it through Vedanta. Swami Veda wants to do it through Vedanta in some cases, but in the case that we'll be considering, through the Yoga Sutra. So I will skip over this and come to this, right? So here what we see is that so this is a combination of kind of talking about initiation in the way we've been thinking about it, and in Tantra it's thought about, and the progression within the Yoga Sutra, and it leads eventually to a cognition which is, which has content that he can then articulate in language and put forth, right? So you remember the Guru, when you place your mind in the Guru, which is kind of, it's close enough to normal initiation, you attain the firmness of what I've translated as cognitive, of samprajñāta samadhi, and then, and this is parallel to the stage where in the yogic perception you'd get to ritambhara prajñā, right? So he has kind of mixed those two together, and he has come up with a way of talking about initiation as having epistemic value, right? So there's a blank slide. What I want to argue through this is that, so there's a couple of things here. One is a historical argument that so obviously the other part of this, the other part of why people like Swamiji or Swami Veda take the Yoga Sutra seriously, I think has two aspects. One is that the Yoga Sutra and Bhashya tradition on their own get us out of the problem of textual authority, right? They do not care about Shruti. The other is that they get us out of the problem of eligibility, which is tied in with textual authority, right? Audiences are broadening. One cannot go into an audience where most people aren't eligible for Vedic study according to Mimamsa or even large chunks of Vedanta and tell them that, well, this is a great system and we should. No, you've got to find something that gets us out of these two problems, right? So obviously the choice of using Yoga Sutra, I think, between the 19th and 20th centuries was shaped by the fact that audiences were broadening, there was more interaction with the larger, all these developments were affecting this. But there is also a continuity with greater integration of, say, Śrīvidyā and Advaita Vedanta, especially institutionally in Sringeri and Kanchi, with the closer integration of yoga and Advaita Vedanta or Sankhya and Advaita Vedanta in certain ways, again, through this period. And I think when we think about figures like Swamiji or Swami Veda exclusively in terms of an epistemic rupture and everything changed and so on and so forth, we miss out on this longer history. And I mean, I'm not the first person to say this. Andrew Nicholson has said this. I think you've said it in some of your work. So there's that. And the other thing is that, and if we think of this as, in terms of developments in Sanskrit and adjacent philosophy, this is how Dīkṣā can be accorded epistemic status. This is how it may be done. And I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for interaction. I invite speakers and the audience to raise some questions, make comments. Please.
I actually had a question about what the content of these initiatory experiences are supposed to be. So for example, in the Buddhist Tantra tradition, often the story is something like you get a glimpse of what Buddhahood would look like through these initiatory experiences. But it seems like in these sorts of cases, it's something else. Like in the Panchanan Tarkaratna case, it's more like it gets a sense of the whole system. So could you say a little bit about what the content?
Right. Thanks so much. Actually, that's a great question because that helps me kind of, that helps me clarify. Is that okay? Can I be heard? Okay. It kind of helps me clarify what I'm trying to say, which is that if you look at descriptions like Bhaskara Raya's or earlier, for example, Lakshmidhara's, what happens in Tantra or Śrīvidyā initiation is kind of similar to what happens in Buddhist initiation, which is that you get so for example, Lakshmidhara says when the initiation happens, you see the goddess in the Manipura and then you take her up and then you have you know, you seat her in the Sahasrara and she hangs out with Shiva, and you draw a curtain and you sit in a house nearby, right? This, I think, between in Tarkaratna, sort of, and around that period, and in Swami Veda, we see a shift, where instead of a vision that results from initiation, we begin to get a cognition which is the content of the initiation, right? Does that at all speak to what you were saying? Okay, so my understanding, at least, of the Shaiva and Shakta Tantras is that the initiation itself is not a cognition. The initiation leads to a cognition, right? And I think this is a shift, that the initiation becomes a cognition. Does that?
Okay, thank you. Any more clarification or comment?
Yeah, so I was just wondering, is there sort of a view about what the content of that experience is? So that was the original question.
I see.
So for instance, like people like in the whole discussion in Jnanapada and so on, like the whole idea is that it gives you a true glimpse of what Buddhahood would look like, which allows you to rationally motivate yourself towards that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it plays like a rational role in the pursuit of liberation
Right.
itself. But here it seems like it has a kind of theoretical content, which,
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, which is, again, that's part of the shift, right? Instead of getting an experience or a glimpse into the nature of reality, you're getting sort of what a Shakta philosophy looks like, or what the Kundalini Sahasranama is, right?
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? Yes, please.
Madam, you have talked about Dīkṣā. Now, what is exactly Dīkṣā? Dīkṣā is a transmission of knowledge or jnana or any spiritual power from the guru to the sisya.
Thank you. So, I mean, what I've tried to show is that normally, I think until, let's say, the 18th century or so, it is thought about as the transmission of consciousness, a transmission of some part of the guru, and then at a certain point, we begin to talk about it more in terms of the transmission of sort of cognitive content as we think of it.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question.
Can we look at another angle? There's a personality deconstruction coexisting with the infusion of grace.
We can?
A personality deconstruction of the disciple, and the infusion of grace makes the guru live in him.
I mean,
So that is the higher cognition.
I mean, yes and no, in the sense that, yes, there is a way in which the guru enters, and of course that transforms the disciple, it's meant to, but I think that is distinct from the kind of cognitive awareness that Tarkaratna or Swami Veda talk about. Does that?
Okay. There are many views.
Yes, one more question, Professor.
Thank you so much for your discussion on Dīkṣā. Now, I got two comments. Only one is that you have mentioned extraordinary perceptions with respect to other philosophers.
I said extrasensory, but yes.
But not Nyaya philosophers.
Yes.
Is there any reason for it? Because Nyaya philosophers have explained all types of errors, what we call false belief, in terms of extraordinary perception, Samanya Lakshana, Sannikarsha, Jnana Lakshana, Sannikarsha, and all these. Very comprehensive, which is lacking even in contemporary Western philosophy. So they can add a new dimension to it.
Thank you, yes.
And second point, that Dīkṣā is, as I see it, it is always there, Guru-Shishya relation. Dīkṣā is dedication, that you are dedicated to it. Without dedication, you cannot achieve, you cannot reach your goal. So, is the concept of dedication is related to Dīkṣā or not?
Thanks so much. On the question of Nyaya, yes, I did not talk about Nyaya on Yogi Pratyaksha, partly for reasons of time, partly because, I was trying to tell a particular story. On dedication and Dīkṣā, I don't see the process of Dīkṣā as, yes, presumably when the disciple seeks initiation, they do dedicate themselves because it's a fairly invasive, in a sense, experience. I don't mean invasive sort of as a bad thing, but it is. But I don't see the actual process as having very much to do with the idea of dedicating oneself, no.
So how do you define Dīkṣā in one word or sentence?
It's an interpersonal transmission which involves the initiate and either a deity or the guru.
Exactly what does it mean in English?
Again, I've said that it can be defined different ways, but yeah, it's a transmission of some part of the awareness of the guru into the disciple, I suppose.
So dedication is involved in it or not?
I think it is involved around it, but not in it.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, any more comments? Very short question. Please come to the mic.
Yeah, so just based on this question answer session, I was thinking, you said interpersonal transmission. So Dīkṣā is something that exists outside of the disciple and that's given to the disciple, or is it kind of a recognition of something or an awareness of something or a discovery of something that already exists within the disciple that the guru or the deity helps find, like something like that?
Right, thanks so much for that. I have not gone into what the metaphysical assumptions of any of these figures does to the way they understand Dīkṣā, right? So, for example, they're all of non-dualists of some kind or the other, right? I did touch upon it with Tarkaratna, which is where he says that really the Shakti Brahman and the individual aren't really distinct, right? But, so the answer is, I suppose, yes, but, right? Yes, in some of these systems, Dīkṣā will have to do with something that's already within the disciple, but the way it's understood is that there are two, at least provisionally distinct entities involved.
There are two entities and...
Right,
yes.
they might not be fundamentally distinct, but for the purposes of that process, they're distinct.
Right, Dīkṣā cannot happen as an individual process. Is something, an interpersonal,
not normally.
A duality is required.
But that again, I emphasize that need not be a final duality, but there is a provisional duality.
Right, and just one. So if we hear of masters who sort of, I don't know if I'm not very strong on literature that way, but people who have self-realized through, I don't know, through meditation or through reading, would that be called the initiation of their path? Would that be called Dīkṣā?
Would that be called? I would not, in the kind of Dīkṣā we are talking about here, I don't think it would fit in. We may call it initiation if we like. We can also, some of these figures, at least for example, Ma Anandamayi had an experience and she thought of it in terms of initiation from the deity themselves. So it's yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. This is the longest I've heard my name in an hour. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. If we don't have any more questions, I think we can close this session. This session is the last before lunch. So thank you very much. Thank you, the speakers, and we'll meet here again at 2:30.